There is a decision sitting in your life right now that you already know you need to make. Not a small decision, not a logistical choice or a preference between options of roughly equal consequence. The real one, the one that has been present for longer than you are comfortable admitting, sitting in the back of your awareness with the patient, immovable quality of something that knows it is not going anywhere. The one that would change the direction of your life if you made it and continues to cost you something real every day that you do not. You know what it is. You have known for a while, and you have been waiting. Not passively, you have been actively, industriously waiting, gathering information, assessing conditions, telling yourself that the timing is not right, that you need to be more prepared, that a few more months of stability or savings or certainty will finally produce the moment in which the decision becomes safe enough to make. That moment is not coming. Not because the preparation is wrong or the caution is unreasonable, but because the perfect moment for a real decision is a myth, constructed by the part of us that would prefer to remain comfortable indefinitely and has learned to speak fluently in the language of prudence. The conditions will always have room for improvement. The timing will always be slightly off. The fear will always be able to find one more reason that now is not quite the right time. The decision will not become easier by waiting. It will only become more expensive. Brown knew this. He had known it for 2 years. He made the decision anyway, not when he was ready, but when the cost of waiting finally exceeded the cost of choosing. Stay with us, because today we are telling the story of a man who waited for the perfect moment until the waiting itself became the crisis, and what happened when he finally made the one decision he had been postponing. And if stories like this one matter to you, subscribe, because somebody out there needs to hear exactly this today. Brown was 37 years old and had been meaning to leave his job for 2 years. Not unhappily, or not only unhappily. The job was not a source of active misery. It paid adequately. The people were decent. The work was familiar in the way that work becomes familiar when you have been doing it long enough that it asks almost nothing new of you. He was good at it in the way that people become good at things they have done for 8 years, competently, efficiently, without the engagement that competence built on genuine interest produces, but competently nonetheless. The problem was not the job. The problem was what Brown knew about himself that the job made it impossible to act on. He was a builder. Not metaphorically, literally. He had been designing and building furniture in his garage for 6 years, starting as a weekend distraction and developing, over time, into something that had begun to look unmistakably like a craft. The pieces he made were not hobbyist quality. They were the work of someone who had put genuine hours into genuine skill development and had arrived somewhere that other people, not just polite friends but strangers who had no obligation to be generous, consistently described as exceptional. He had been selling pieces quietly for 2 years. Not aggressively, not through any deliberate commercial effort, just through the organic word of mouth of people who saw the work and told other people about it. The income was real. Not sufficient to replace his salary, not yet, but real and growing in a direction that a person paying honest attention could see was going somewhere. Brown was paying honest attention. He was also paying honest attention to everything that could go wrong. The financial risk of leaving stable employment before the craft income was sufficient. The possibility that the market for what he made was narrower than the current demand suggested. The likelihood that turning a passion into a business would change the relationship with the craft in ways that might not be recoverable. The timing, always the timing, which was never quite right because there was always a reason to wait for one more quarter of data, one more client, one more piece of evidence that the decision was sufficiently safe to make. He told himself he was being responsible. He was being afraid. And the fear was dressed so convincingly in the language of prudence that he had stopped being able to tell the difference. The 2 years pass the way years pass when you are not making the decision you need to make, not quickly, not cleanly, but with the accumulating weight of time spent in a life that is not the one you would have chosen if you had been choosing. Brown's work at his job became harder to sustain not because the job became harder, but because the gap between where he was and where he knew he was capable of being had been growing for 2 years without any action to close it. The garage work that had always provided relief from the job began to feel different, tinged with the complicated emotion of something you love that you are also, in some essential way, failing to honor. He was not unhappy. He was diminished. A quieter, more contained version of himself than the one that existed in the garage on a Saturday morning with good wood and a problem worth solving. The bottom arrived not dramatically, but with the particular quiet devastation of a small moment that carries more weight than it should. Brown was at a client meeting, a presentation he had prepared thoroughly and delivered competently, when his manager offered a piece of feedback that was minor in its content and enormous in its effect. She said he seemed distracted lately, that the quality of his presence in the room had changed, that she wanted to flag it early because she valued him and did not want it to become a pattern. She meant it kindly. Brown received it as the truth he had been avoiding. He was distracted. He had been distracted for 2 years, present in the room but elsewhere in his actual attention, giving the job the minimum his professionalism required, while the part of him that cared about things waited in a garage for the decision that never came. He drove home that evening and sat in the garage for a long time without working. He was not strategizing. He was not assessing conditions or calculating timelines or adding new data points to the analysis he had been conducting for 2 years. He was simply sitting with the recognition that the perfect moment was not a real thing and had never been a real thing, and that every month he spent waiting for it was a month he was choosing, by the logic of inaction, to remain exactly where he was. The decision was not complicated. It had never been complicated. It had been frightening, which was different, and which he had been treating as the same. He did not quit immediately. He was not reckless, and the decision did not require recklessness. What he did was set a date, 6 months away, specific and non-negotiable, and spend those 6 months preparing with the focused intention of someone who has finally decided rather than the unfocused anxiety of someone still deciding. He told his partner. He told his most reliable clients. He built the infrastructure the business needed and addressed the financial gaps his analysis had identified with the problem-solving energy of someone moving towards something rather than standing still. 6 months later, Brown handed in his notice. Not with the euphoric certainty of someone who knows everything will work out, with the steady, grounded clarity of someone who has made a real decision and is prepared to live inside its consequences, the good ones and the difficult ones, rather than spend another year living inside the consequences of not deciding. The first year was hard in the ways he had anticipated, and some he had not. The income was inconsistent before it became consistent. There were months that required the financial reserves he had built specifically for those months. There were moments of doubt that arrived with the regularity of something that had always known it would show up once the protection of postponement was removed. He worked through all of it, not because it was easy, because the difficulty of building something he had chosen was a fundamentally different experience from the difficulty of maintaining something he had not. The same hours, the same effort, the same uncertainty, but pointed in a direction he had actually selected. The garage on a Tuesday morning was not a retreat from his life. It was the center of it. By the end of the second year, Brown's craft business was generating more than his salary had. By the end of the third, he had a 6-month waiting list. He had not needed better timing. He had needed to stop waiting for it. The perfect moment is a story the fear tells. It is a convincing story, detailed, internally consistent, always just one more condition away from being true. It speaks in the language of prudence and sounds indistinguishable from wisdom, until you have been listening to it long enough to notice that the conditions it requires never quite arrive, that the timing is always slightly off, that there is always one more reason that now is not quite right. The decision you are waiting to make is not waiting for the perfect moment. It is waiting for you to accept that the perfect moment was never coming, and that the cost of waiting has already exceeded the cost of choosing. You do not need more preparation. You do not need more certainty. You do not need the conditions to be ideal or the fear to be absent or the outcome to be guaranteed. You need to make the decision, not because it is safe, because you already know it is right. And you have known for longer than you are comfortable admitting. Brown waited 2 years for a moment that was never going to arrive on its own. The day he set a date was the day his life started moving. You are one decision away from a different life. The decision is not waiting for the right moment. It is waiting for you. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it today.